The first frost of the season had painted the windows of the Lakeview truck stop silver by the time Elena Varga finished her double shift. She stood at the register counting out her tips, $47 in change, not enough to matter but too much to leave behind, while the last trucker paid his tab and headed for the door. "You want me to wait?" asked Deb, the night manager, already pulling on her coat. "Parking lot's dark. That light's been out for 2 weeks." "I'm fine. Go home to your kids." "You should go home to yours." Elena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Home meant her mother's disappointed silence and the stack of bills on the kitchen counter, and the mortgage notice she'd hidden in her sock drawer so Miguel wouldn't find it and worry. Home meant pretending everything was fine for two children who'd already learned that their mother's smiles didn't always match her voice. She locked up at 11:15 and stepped into the Minnesota cold, her breath fogging in the parking lot lights that still worked. October in Lake Country meant winter was coming whether you were ready or not. Elena was not ready. She hadn't been ready for anything in the 2 years since David had left, taking what little savings they'd had and leaving behind a note that said he needed to find himself. She'd found herself instead. Found herself working doubles at the truck stop. Found herself explaining to her son why Daddy wasn't coming back. Found herself lying awake at 3 a.m. doing math that never added up. The motorcycle was parked at the far end of the lot, near the dumpsters where the shadows pooled thick. Elena noticed it only because something about its angle was wrong. Listing slightly, the kickstand dug into gravel that had shifted. A man sat on the curb beside it, his head in his hands, a leather cut hanging loose on shoulders that looked too tired to hold it up. She should have walked past, should have gotten in her car, driven home, relieved her mother of babysitting duty, and collapsed into bed for 5 hours before doing it all again. That was the smart thing, the safe thing. Elena Varga had never been accused of being safe. "Kitchen's closed," she called out, stopping 10 feet away, "but there's coffee left if you want it." The man looked up. He was older than she'd expected, late 50s, maybe 60, with a gray beard and eyes that held the kind of exhaustion she recognized from her own mirror. His cut said, "North Country Riders MC," across the back, with a patch on the front that read, "Road Captain." "Appreciate it," he said. His voice was gravel and smoke. "But I can't pay." "I didn't ask for payment." "I know. That's why I'm telling you." He stood slowly, and Elena saw the stiffness in his movements, the way he favored his left side. Old injury or new pain, she couldn't tell. "Someone lifted my wallet at the gas station in Brainerd. Didn't notice until I'd already filled the tank and they'd called the sheriff." "What happened?" "Talked my way out of a theft charge, barely. Sheriff was a vet. Let me go with a warning." He gestured toward the bike. "But now I'm stuck. No cash, no cards, no way to call anyone. Phone was in the wallet." Elena looked at the motorcycle, then at the man, then at the road stretching dark and empty toward the highway. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make you a plate." His name was Tom Halverson, but everyone called him Grizz. He'd earned the nickname 40 years ago, he told her, for reasons he no longer remembered and didn't particularly care to. He ate the burger and fries she made him like a man who hadn't seen food in days, though he insisted it had only been since morning. "Where were you headed?" Elena asked, refilling his coffee. The diner was empty now, just the two of them and the hum of the refrigerators. Grizz was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into the saddlebag he'd carried inside and pulled out a small metal urn, no bigger than a coffee can, etched with a pattern of wildflowers. "My wife," he said. "Elaine. She passed in August, ovarian cancer." He set the urn on the counter with a gentleness that made Elena's chest ache. "We used to ride up to Lake Vermilion every fall, watch the leaves turn. She made me promise I'd take her ashes there when she was gone." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She had 61 good years, more than most people get." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "I just need to finish the ride. Get her to the lake. Then I can figure out the rest." Elena thought about the mortgage notice in her sock drawer, the foreclosure warning she hadn't told anyone about, the way her son had asked last week if they were going to have to move, and she'd lied and said no, everything was fine, Mama had it under control. She thought about all the times she'd needed help and hadn't asked for it, because asking meant admitting she couldn't do it alone. "Stay here tonight," she said. "There's a couch in the break room. I'll bring you breakfast in the morning, and we'll figure out how to get you to that lake." Grizz looked at her for a long moment. Why? Because someone should. Elena wiped down the counter, not meeting his eyes. And because my father rode, a long time ago, before I was born. He died on his bike when I was 6. I don't remember much about him, but I remember my mother saying he never passed anyone broken down on the side of the road, said it was against the code. Your mother was right. She usually is. Elena pulled her keys from her pocket. Lock up when you're done. I'll be back at 6. She was halfway to the door when Grizz's voice stopped her. What's your name? Elena. Elena. He said it like he was committing it to memory. Thank you. For the food. For the couch. For not being afraid of a stranger in a parking lot. I'm afraid of plenty of things, Elena said, but not people who need help. She walked out into the cold, got in her car, and drove home through the dark. In the morning, she would bring Grizz breakfast and help him figure out how to get his wallet back or contact his club or whatever needed to happen next. She didn't know yet that he'd already memorized her name tag, already noticed the tiredness in her eyes that went deeper than one double shift, already decided that helping her was going to be his next ride after he finished Elaine's. She didn't know that 48 hours from now, the sound of engines would fill her street and everything would change. She just drove home, checked on her sleeping children, and lay awake until 3 a.m., doing math that still didn't add up. But for the first time in months, she fell asleep thinking about something other than the bills. She fell asleep thinking about wildflowers on a metal urn, and a promise kept, and the way a stranger had looked at her like she'd given him something precious when all she'd done was make a burger and offer a couch. Maybe that was enough. Maybe kindness didn't need to be more than that. She'd find out soon enough. Elena arrived at the truck stop at 5:45 the next morning to find Grizz already awake, the break room couch neatly made up with the spare blankets she'd left him, the coffee already brewing. Couldn't sleep, he said by way of explanation. Old habit. Elaine used to say I'd be up before the roosters, even if we didn't own any. Elena poured herself a cup and sat across from him at the small break room table. The urn sat between them, the etched wildflowers catching the fluorescent light. I made some calls, she said. Use the diner phone. Your club's vice president, Mac? He's wiring money to the Western Union in town. Should be there by noon. Grizz's eyebrows rose. How'd you get Mac's number? Called the bar in Duluth where your club meets, the one listed on your website. She shrugged at his expression. I waitressed my way through 2 years of community college. I know how to find people who don't want to be found. I wasn't hiding. No, but you weren't asking for help either. She held his gaze. Sound familiar? Something shifted in Grizz's face. Recognition, maybe? Or the beginning of understanding. Before he could respond, the bell over the front door chimed, and Elena was on her feet, switching into work mode without conscious thought. The morning passed, the way mornings always did. Truckers wanting eggs and complaints about the highway construction, regulars wanting coffee and gossip about the neighbors, a young family with 2 kids who reminded Elena so much of her own that she had to step into the walk-in cooler for a moment just to breathe. Grizz stayed in the break room, out of sight, but she could feel him watching through the service window, watching her move, watching her smile, watching her pretend that everything was fine when they both knew it wasn't. At 10:30, the door opened and Elena's stomach dropped. Marcus Webb was 46 years old and had worked for Great Northern Savings and loaned for 22 of them. He wore the same gray suit he always wore, carried the same leather briefcase, had the same expression of professional sympathy that Elena had come to recognize as the face of bad news. Mrs. Varga. He settled onto a stool at the counter. I was hoping we could talk. I'm working. This won't take long. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Elena knew what was inside without looking. The same numbers she'd been staring at for months. The same impossible math that kept her awake at night. The bank has been more than patient. 6 months of missed payments. We've offered extensions, payment plans, modifications, and I've taken everyone. Elena kept her voice low, conscious of the other customers. I'm doing everything I can. I know you are. Marcus's voice softened, and for a moment, Elena saw something human behind the professional mask, a flicker of genuine discomfort, maybe even guilt. But the board has made a decision. The property goes to auction on the 15th. That gives you 12 days to either pay the arrears in full or vacate. The number hit her like a physical blow. $8,400. She'd calculated it so many times she could recite it in her sleep. $8,400 plus fees, plus penalties, plus the interest that kept accumulating like snow in a Minnesota winter. "I need more time," she heard herself say. "There is no more time." Marcus closed the folder. "I'm sorry, Elena. I really am. I've known your mother for 30 years. I remember when your father—" He stopped, started again. "I don't want to do this, but I don't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice. Not when you work for a bank." He stood, left a 5 on the counter for the coffee he hadn't ordered. 12 days. "I'll do what I can to delay the paperwork, but I can't promise anything." He walked out. Elena stood behind the counter, the folder sitting in front of her like a bomb. "Who was that?" Grizz's voice from the service window. Elena didn't turn around. "Nobody." Didn't look like nobody. Looked like the kind of nobody who carries bad news in a briefcase. "It's handled." "Is it?" Now she turned. Grizz was leaning against the window frame, his arms crossed, his eyes sharp despite the grief that still lived in them. "It's none of your business," Elena said. "You made me your business last night. Seems only fair." "That was different." "How?" "Because you needed help. And you don't?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena opened her mouth to answer, to deflect, to do what she'd always done, pretend, minimize, survive. But something about the way Grizz was looking at her made the lie stick in her throat. "I can't lose the house," she said quietly. "My kids, Miguel's 12, Sophia's 8, they've already lost their father. I can't make them lose their home too." "How much?" "It doesn't matter." "How much, Elena?" She told him, watched his expression do the same math hers had done 100 times, the impossibility of it, the gap between what she earned and what she owed. "Elaine and I never had kids," Grizz said slowly. "She wanted them. We tried for years. When it didn't happen, she said maybe it was the universe telling us we were supposed to help other people's kids instead." He was quiet for a moment. "She'd have liked you. She'd have liked your kids too, even without meeting them." "Grizz, I'm not offering money." He held up a hand. "I know you wouldn't take it. Too proud, too stubborn, too convinced that asking for help means you've failed." Something flickered in his eyes. "I was the same way when Elaine got sick. Tried to handle everything myself. Almost killed me." "What changed?" "She did. She sat me down one night and told me that letting people help wasn't weakness, it was trust. It was saying, 'I believe you care enough to show up.'" He smiled, but it was sad. "Took me 6 months to hear it. I don't think you have 6 months." The lunch rush started before Elena could respond. She worked through it on autopilot, taking orders, delivering plates, smiling at customers who had no idea that the woman pouring their coffee was 12 days from losing everything. Grizz left for the Western Union at noon. She expected him to go straight to Lake Vermilion after that, to finish his ride, scatter Elaine's ashes, disappear back into whatever life was waiting for him after grief. Instead, he came back. He walked into the diner at 3 o'clock with a folder of his own, sat down at the counter, and spread papers across the surface like a man planning a campaign. "What is this?" Elena asked. "Phone tree. Every North Country rider within 200 miles, plus contacts in 3 other clubs." He tapped a handwritten list. "I made some calls from the Western Union. Told them about a woman who fed a stranger when she had nothing to spare. Told them about 2 kids who might lose their home because their mother's too proud to ask for help." "Grizz, I didn't ask you to—" "No, you didn't. That's the point." He looked up at her, and his eyes were fierce. "You know what Elaine's last words were? She said, 'Find someone to help, Tom. Don't let me be the last person you take care of.' I thought she meant the ride, getting her ashes to the lake. But I think she meant more than that." Elena stared at the phone tree, the names and numbers, the web of connections spreading out from this one diner in the middle of Minnesota. "This won't work," she said. $8,000 in 12 days from strangers? Not strangers. Grizz's voice was quiet but certain. Family. The kind you choose, not the kind you're born into. The kind that shows up when you need them, even if you don't know how to ask. He stood, gathered his papers, and headed for the door. "I'm going to Lake Vermilion tonight. Got a promise to keep. But I'll be back tomorrow." He paused, his hand on the doorframe. "And I won't be alone." He walked out into the October afternoon, leaving Elena standing behind the counter with the foreclosure notice in one hand and the beginning of hope in the other. She didn't believe it would work, couldn't believe it. $8,000 was an impossible number, a mountain she'd been trying to climb for 2 years. But for the first time since David had left, someone else was offering to climb it with her. She tucked the papers into her apron and went back to work, counting down the hours until her shift ended and she could go home and hold her children and pretend for one more night that everything was going to be fine. Except maybe, just maybe, it actually would be. Lake Vermilion lay silver under the October moon, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple of fish rising to feed. Grizz stood at the water's edge with the urn in his hands, the cold seeping through his boots, the silence pressing against him like a living thing. He'd imagined this moment 100 times since August, had rehearsed speeches in his head, written letters he'd never send, practiced the words he wanted to say when he finally let her go. But now, standing here with Elaine's ashes and 43 years of memories, the words wouldn't come. "I don't know how to do this without you," he said finally. His voice sounded strange in the stillness, too loud, too small, too alive for a place that felt like the edge of the world. "I thought I did. Thought I could just keep writing until the grief ran out. But it doesn't run out, does it?" The lake didn't answer. He hadn't expected it to. "I met someone yesterday, a woman at a diner. She fed me when I couldn't pay, gave me a place to sleep, made calls to get me help when I was too stubborn to ask for it myself." He smiled, though his eyes were wet. "Reminded me of you. That same stubborn kindness, that same refusal to let anyone carry their weight alone." He opened the urn. The ashes inside were gray and fine, nothing like the woman who'd laughed at his jokes and stolen his covers and held his hand through 43 years of good days and bad ones. "She's in trouble, Elaine. Losing her house, losing hope, 2 kids who need her, and she's trying to carry the whole world by herself." He paused. "I think maybe you sent me to that parking lot. I think maybe this is what you meant when you told me to find someone to help." He tipped the urn slowly, letting the ashes fall into the water. They spread across the surface like smoke, catching the moonlight, before sinking into the dark. "I love you," he said. "I'll love you until I'm the one being scattered, but I think it's time to stop riding away from things and start riding toward them." He stood there until the last of the ashes had disappeared, until the lake was silver again, until his feet were numb and his heart was somehow lighter than it had been in months. Then he walked back to his bike, kicked the engine to life, and rode south through the Minnesota night. He had calls to make, plans to finish, a promise to keep to a woman who'd shown him that kindness still existed in the world. Elena found out about the fundraiser at 7 the next morning. She'd arrived at the diner to find Deb already there, phone in hand, eyes wide with something that looked like excitement but felt like ambush. "Someone named Mac called," Deb said. "From the North Country Writers? He said they've already raised $2,000, 2,000, Elena, in one night, and he says there's more coming." Elena's stomach dropped. "What?" "He said Grizz told them about you, about the foreclosure. They're doing some kind of collection, passing the hat at bars, calling in favors, reaching out to other clubs." Deb was grinning. "Elena, this is amazing. You're going to be okay." "No." The word came out harder than Elena intended. "No, I didn't ask for this. You didn't have to ask. That's the point. It's charity." Elena's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the counter to make them stop. "I'm not a charity case. I'm not some project for a bunch of strangers to feel good about. They're not trying to feel good about themselves. They're trying to help you. I don't need help. Elena," Deb's voice softened, "you're 3 weeks from being homeless. You work double shifts 6 days a week. You haven't bought yourself new shoes in 2 years. She reached out, put a hand on Elena's arm. "Let someone help you, please." Elena pulled away. She grabbed her apron, tied it with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling, and walked into the kitchen without another word. The morning passed in a blur of orders and coffee refills and the slow creep of panic that Elena couldn't shake. Every time the door opened, she flinched, expecting Grizz to walk in with more news of the fundraiser she hadn't asked for, didn't want, couldn't accept. At 11, it wasn't Grizz who walked in. It was her mother. Rosa Varga was 67 years old and had the kind of face that could communicate disappointment without saying a word. She settled onto a stool at the counter, ordered coffee she wouldn't drink, and waited until Elena couldn't avoid her any longer. "Miguel called me this morning," Rosa said. "He found the foreclosure notice in your sock drawer." Elena closed her eyes. "Mama, you told me you had it under control. You looked me in the eye and lied to me, Elena." "I was handling it." "By hiding papers in your underwear drawer?" Rosa's voice cracked. "By working yourself to death while your children watch you disappear? By being too proud to tell your own mother that you needed help?" "I didn't want you to worry." "I'm your mother. Worrying is my job." Rosa reached across the counter and took Elena's hand. "Do you know why your father rode with those men? The bikers, the club, all of it? Because he loved motorcycles. Because he loved belonging to something bigger than himself. Because when one of them was in trouble, the others showed up. No questions, no judgment, no keeping score." Rosa's eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall. "He would have been ashamed of you today, not because you're in trouble, but because you're too proud to let anyone help you out of it." The words hit Elena like a slap. She tried to pull her hand away, but Rosa held on. "I found out about the fundraiser," Rosa continued. "Your friend Deb called me. She told me about the bikers, about the money they're raising. And do you know what I did?" Elena shook her head. "I called my church group, told them about my daughter, the one who works 60 hours a week and still can't make ends meet because her husband left her with nothing. Told them about my grandchildren, who might lose their home because their mother is too stubborn to admit she's drowning." "Mama, you shouldn't have. I should have done it months ago. I should have done it the first time I saw that look in your eyes, the one that said you were carrying something too heavy to hold." Rosa stood, came around the counter, and pulled Elena into an embrace that smelled like the kitchen of her childhood, like coffee and cinnamon and unconditional love. "Let us help you, mija. Let us be your family." Elena stood rigid in her mother's arms for a long moment. Then something cracked, not broke, but cracked, like ice beginning to thaw, and she felt herself soften, felt the resistance she'd been holding for 2 years begin to give way. "I don't know how," she whispered. "You start by saying yes." Rosa pulled back, held Elena's face in her hands. "Can you do that? Can you say yes?" Elena looked at her mother's face, lined with years and worry, and the kind of love that didn't ask for anything in return. She thought about Miguel, who'd found the foreclosure notice and hadn't said a word, about Sophia, who'd started sleeping in Elena's bed because she was afraid of something she couldn't name, about Grizz, who'd lost his wife and was still finding ways to keep his promise. "Yes," Elena said. The word felt strange in her mouth, too simple for everything it meant. "Yes, okay, yes." Rosa smiled. It was the first real smile Elena had seen on her mother's face in months. "Good," Rosa said. "Now go home. Take the rest of the day off. Spend time with your children. Let someone else pour coffee for once." "I can't just leave. Deb needs me." "Deb will survive." Rosa was already untying Elena's apron. "Go. The bikers are coming tomorrow morning. You should be rested when they arrive." "What do you mean, coming?" "I mean coming. Here. To your house." Rosa's smile widened. "That man, Grizz? He called your friend Deb an hour ago. Said he's bringing everyone. Said they want to meet the woman who fed a stranger in a parking lot." "How many is everyone?" "He didn't say." Rosa handed Elena her jacket. "But I'd make extra coffee if I were you." Elena drove home in a daze, her mind racing with numbers and logistics and the impossible mathematics of hope. $2,000 raised in one night. Her mother's church group. Grizz and his riders coming tomorrow. It wasn't enough. 8,000 was still a mountain, and she still didn't know how to climb it. But for the first time, she wasn't trying to climb it alone. She pulled into her driveway as the sun was setting, painting the little blue house in shades of orange and gold. Miguel was waiting on the porch, his 12-year-old face too serious for his age. "Grandma called," he said. "She told me what's happening." "Miguel, I'm sorry I found the papers. I wasn't snooping. I was just looking for my baseball cards, and it's okay." Elena sat down on the porch steps, patted the space beside her. Miguel sat. "I should have told you. I was trying to protect you, but I think I was just scared." "Scared of what?" "Of you thinking I couldn't take care of you, of being a bad mom." Miguel was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned against her shoulder, the way he used to when he was small. "You're not a bad mom," he said. "You're just tired. Everyone gets tired sometimes." Elena put her arm around her son and watched the sun sink below the tree line. Tomorrow the bikers would come. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight she had her children and her mother's voice in her head, and the first quiet moment she'd allowed herself in longer than she could remember. She held on to it like a promise, like wildflowers on a metal urn, like something worth fighting for. The sound woke her at 7:15, a low rumble that built slowly, like thunder rolling in from the lake. Elena sat up in bed, disoriented, her heart pounding before her mind caught up. Engines, dozens of them, maybe more, growing louder with each passing second. She threw on a robe and ran to the front window. Sophia was already there, her 8-year-old face pressed against the glass, her eyes wide with wonder. "Mama," she whispered. "Mama, look." Elena looked. The street was filling with motorcycles. They came from both directions, chrome gleaming in the early morning light, exhaust fogging in the October cold. 10 bikes, 20, 30. They lined up along the curb, filled the driveway, spilled onto the lawn until there was no space left. And at the front of them all, sitting astride a weathered Harley with a metal urn strapped to his saddlebag, was Grizz. Elena walked outside in her robe and slippers, her children trailing behind her. The engines died one by one until the street was silent except for the ticking of cooling metal and the distant call of geese heading south. Grizz dismounted and walked toward her. His eyes were red-rimmed, from the ride or from grief she couldn't tell, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Told you I wouldn't come alone." Elena looked at the riders, men and women, young and old, leather cuts from half a dozen different clubs, North Country Riders, Iron Range Brotherhood, Lake Superior Saints. Some she recognized from the truckers who passed through the diner. Most she'd never seen before. "I don't understand," she said. "How did you—" "Word travels fast when someone does right by one of us." Grizz reached into his cut and pulled out an envelope, thick with cash. "This is from the North Country chapter, $4,200. Every member kicked in what they could." Elena's knees went weak. "Grizz, that's not all." A woman stepped forward from the crowd, tall, gray-haired, wearing a cut that said Iron Range Brotherhood and a patch that read President. "I'm Marie. Grizz called me yesterday, told me what you did for him. My chapter raised $1,800. "And ours got $1,200, said another writer, a young man with a beard that couldn't quite hide his youth. "Lake Superior Saints. We're small, but we show up." Elena did the math without meaning to. 4,200 plus 1,800 plus 1,200, $7,200. Still short, still not enough. But then Rosa's car pulled up, and behind it came a procession Elena hadn't expected. A dozen vehicles, sedans and minivans and pickup trucks, parking wherever they could find space. Her mother emerged with a cashier's check in her hand and tears on her cheeks. "The church group," Rosa said, "and the ladies' auxiliary, and the VFW post where your father used to drink." She pressed the check into Elena's hands. $1,400, Mika. It's not much, but it's enough." Elena's voice broke. "Mama, it's enough. It's more than enough." She stood in her front yard in her bathrobe, surrounded by strangers who'd become family overnight, holding $8,600 that she hadn't asked for and couldn't have imagined. The foreclosure notice was still in her sock drawer, but it didn't matter anymore. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "I don't know how to—" "You don't thank us." Grizz's voice was gruff. "You pay it forward. Someone needs help down the road. You show up. That's how it works. That's the only way it works." Miguel stepped forward, his 12-year-old shoulders squared like he was preparing for something important. "Can I say something?" Grizz nodded. "My mom works really hard," Miguel said. His voice was steady, but Elena could see his hands trembling at his sides. "She works all the time, and she never complains, and she never asks for anything. My dad left, and she just kept going, like it didn't even hurt." He looked at Elena, and his eyes were bright with tears he was too proud to let fall. "But it did hurt. I know it did, and I just want to say thank you for helping her when she wouldn't help herself." The silence that followed was broken only by Sophia, who walked over to Grizz and tugged on his sleeve. "Is that your wife?" she asked, pointing to the urn on his saddlebag. "The one with the flowers?" Grizz knelt so he was at her level. "Yes, sweetheart, that's Elaine. She's pretty. The flowers, I mean." Did she like flowers? She loved them. Wildflowers especially. Said they grew wherever they wanted and didn't ask permission. Sophia nodded seriously. My mom's like that. She doesn't ask permission either. Grizz looked up at Elena, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or gratitude, or the particular understanding of two people who'd learned to carry their burdens alone, and were only now discovering they didn't have to. No, he said. She doesn't. The crowd had started to disperse, riders heading for coffee, Rosa organizing breakfast in Elena's kitchen, Marie and the other club presidents comparing notes on the ride home, when the gray sedan pulled up. Marcus Webb got out slowly, his briefcase in hand, his face carrying the same expression of professional sympathy Elena had come to dread. He stopped at the edge of the yard, taking in the motorcycles, the crowd, the woman in the bathrobe holding an envelope full of cash. Mrs. Varga, his voice was careful, I see you've had some visitors. Mr. Webb. Elena walked toward him, and she was surprised to find that her hands weren't shaking. I have your money, all of it. $8,400, plus enough left over for next month's payment. She held out the envelope. Marcus didn't take it. I heard about what's happening here, he said quietly. Word gets around in a small town. Bikers raising money for a single mother. Churches getting involved. It's been all over the local Facebook group since last night. Is that a problem? No. Marcus set down his briefcase. It's not a problem. It's... He stopped, looked at the motorcycles lining the street, at the riders drinking coffee on her lawn, at the children watching from the porch. My father was a loan officer, worked for the same bank I do, back when it was locally owned. He used to tell me that banking wasn't about numbers, it was about people, about knowing when to hold the line and when to bend. And which is this? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder, the same folder he'd shown her at the diner, the one with all the numbers that had kept her awake at night. The board approved your foreclosure last week, he said, but they also gave me discretionary authority to negotiate settlements, payment plans, modifications. He opened the folder, pulled out a document. This is a loan modification agreement. It reduces your monthly payment by 30% and extends your term by 5 years. If you sign it, the foreclosure proceedings stop today. Elena stared at the document. Why? Why would you do this? Because my father would have done it. Because I've spent 22 years forgetting why I got into this business in the first place. He glanced at the crowd behind her. And because I'd rather face my board than face that group of bikers if I put a single mother and her kids on the street. A ripple of laughter moved through the riders who'd overheard. Marie stepped forward, her each arms crossed. Smart man, she said. We remember faces. Marcus almost smiled. I'm sure you do. Elena took the document, read it carefully, the way she'd learned to read everything since David had left and the fine print had become her enemy. The terms were fair. More than fair. Do you have a pen? She asked. Marcus handed her one. Elena signed her name on the line at the bottom, her hand steady for the first time in months. I'll file this today, Marcus said, taking back the document. You'll get confirmation by the end of the week. He paused. And Mrs. Varga? For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I should have offered this months ago. You're offering it now. That's what matters. He nodded once, got back in his car, and drove away. Elena watched him go, the envelope of cash still in her hands, money she no longer needed for the arrears, money that could go toward the future instead of the past. She turned back to the crowd. Grizz was watching her with something like pride in his eyes. What are you going to do with it? He asked. The money? Elena looked at the envelope, then at her children on the porch, then at the riders who'd traveled hundreds of miles to help a stranger they'd never met. Pay it forward, she said, the way you told me to. Start a fund, maybe, for other families who are drowning and too proud to ask for help. Elaine would have liked that. I think I would have liked Elaine. Grizz reached into his saddlebag and unstrapped the urn. He held it for a moment, his thumb tracing the etched wildflowers, then handed it to Elena. I scattered her ashes at the lake, he said, but I want you to keep this. Put flowers in it if you want, or just let it sit on your shelf and remember that someone out there is looking out for you. Elena took the urn. It was lighter than she'd expected, empty now, just metal and memory, but it felt like the most valuable thing anyone had ever given her. Thank you, she said, for everything, for not letting me say no. Thank you for feeding a stranger when you had nothing to spare." Griz's voice was rough. "That's where it all started. One burger and a couch in a break room. That's all it took." He mounted his bike. The other riders followed suit, engines roaring to life one by one, until the street was filled with thunder again. Miguel and Sophia came down from the porch to stand beside Elena, one child on each side, watching the procession form. Grizz raised a hand in farewell. Elena raised hers in return. Then the engines surged, and the riders pulled away, heading north and south and east and west, scattering like seeds on the wind. Elena stood in her front yard long after the last rumble had faded, holding an empty urn etched with wildflowers, her children pressed against her sides. "Mom?" Sophia tugged at her robe. "Are we going to be okay?" Elena looked at the little blue house that was hers again, at the money in her hand that meant a future instead of an ending, at the sky stretching, endless and blue above the Minnesota morning. "Yeah, baby," she said, "we're going to be okay." And for the first time in 2 years, she believed it. 6 months later, on the first warm day of April, Elena planted wildflowers in the backyard of the little blue house. Miguel dug the holes while Sophia scattered seeds with more enthusiasm than precision, and Rosa sat on the porch with a glass of lemonade, offering advice that nobody asked for and everyone appreciated. The urn sat on the kitchen windowsill where Elena had placed it in October, filled now with dried lavender from her mother's garden. She'd thought about putting fresh flowers in it, the way Grizz had suggested, but dried lavender felt right, something that lasted, something that held its scent even after the bloom had faded, a reminder that some things endured. The Elaine Halverson Memorial Fund had helped 4 families since October. Elena had set it up with the leftover money from the collection, plus donations that kept trickling in from writers and church groups and strangers who'd heard the story and wanted to be part of something good. The local credit union managed the account. Marie from the Iron Range Brotherhood sat on the advisory board, and every month, Elena reviewed applications from families who were drowning the way she'd been drowning. Too proud to ask, too tired to fight, one bad break away from losing everything. She'd learned to recognize them. The careful way they counted change at the diner register. The practiced smile that never quite reached their eyes. The resignation that settled into shoulders that had carried too much for too long. She'd been one of them. Sometimes she still was, but now she knew what to do about it. Grizz called every few weeks, usually from the road, his voice crackling through whatever backwater cell tower he'd managed to find. He was riding again, not running from grief anymore, but moving through it, letting the miles unspool behind him like thread from a spool. He'd visited twice since October, once for Thanksgiving dinner at Rosa's insistence, and once in February, when a winter storm had stranded him 50 miles from the truck stop and Elena had driven through the snow to bring him home. Home. That's what the little blue house had become again. Not just a building with a mortgage and a leaky roof and a furnace that groaned every time the temperature dropped. A home. A place where her children did homework at the kitchen table, and her mother fell asleep watching telenovelas, and the smell of coffee in the morning meant something other than another shift to survive. Miguel had started playing baseball in the spring league. He wasn't the best player on the team, but he showed up for every practice, worked harder than anyone else, and never complained when the coach put him in right field. Elena made it to every game she could, sitting in the bleachers with Sophia beside her, cheering for groundouts and strikeouts and all the small victories that added up to something larger. Sophia had stopped sleeping in Elena's bed. She'd announced one night in January that she was too old for that she was 8.5 now, and 8.5-year-olds slept in their own rooms. Elena had agreed, had tucked her in and kissed her forehead, and walked to her own room feeling something that took her a moment to identify. Pride. She was proud of her daughter, proud of her son, proud of herself, for holding on long enough to see them grow. The diner hadn't changed much. Deb still managed the night shift. The parking lot light still flickered. The truckers still came and went, leaving tips and complaints and the occasional piece of wisdom that stuck with Elena longer than it should have. But Elena had changed. She'd cut her hours back to 40 a week, still more than most people worked, but less than the 60 she'd been killing herself with before. She'd started taking online classes toward a business degree, squeezing in coursework during slow afternoons and quiet evenings after the kids went to bed. She'd even gone on a date, just one, with a divorced firefighter named Paul who'd made her laugh and hadn't pushed when she said she wasn't ready for anything serious. She wasn't sure she'd ever be ready. But she was starting to believe that ready wasn't the point. The point was showing up. The point was trying. The point was letting people in, even when every instinct screamed to keep the walls up and the doors locked. The wildflowers wouldn't bloom until summer. Elena knew that, but she planted them anyway, pressing seeds into soil that was still cold from winter, trusting that warmth would come. "Mom?" Miguel's voice pulled her back to the present. He was standing at the edge of the garden bed, dirt on his knees, a question in his eyes. "Why wildflowers? Why not roses or tulips or something?" Elena sat back on her heels and looked at her son, 12 years old, almost 13 now, growing into someone she was only beginning to know. "Because wildflowers grow wherever they want," she said. "They don't need perfect conditions. They just need a chance." Miguel nodded slowly, processing this the way he processed everything, carefully, thoroughly, filing it away for later examination. "Like us," he said. "Yeah." Elena smiled. "Like us." Rosa called from the porch that dinner was ready. Sophia ran toward the house, already arguing with her grandmother about what they were having. Miguel lingered for a moment, looking at the garden bed, at the seeds they'd planted, at the future taking root beneath the soil. "Dad called last week," he said quietly. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry." Elena's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "What did he say?" "He said he was sorry, that he wanted to see us." Miguel met her eyes. "I told him he could call back when he was ready to show up for real. Not just talk, show up." Elena reached out and squeezed her son's shoulder. "That was brave." "I learned it from you." He walked toward the house, leaving Elena alone in the garden, with the setting sun and the smell of fresh earth and the seeds waiting to become something beautiful. She thought about Grizz, somewhere on a highway with the wind in his face and Elaine's memory riding beside him. About Rosa, who'd never stopped believing in her even when Elena had stopped believing in herself. About Marcus Webb, who'd chosen compassion when he could have chosen the bottom line. About all the writers who'd filled her street on that October morning, strangers who'd become family because someone had decided she was worth saving. She thought about wildflowers, growing wherever they wanted, not asking permission. She stood up, brushed the dirt from her knees, and walked toward the little blue house where her children were waiting. The urn gleamed in the kitchen window, catching the last light of the day. Elena lifted a hand toward it as she passed. A wave, a thank you, a promise. Then she went inside to have dinner with her family. If this story moved you, subscribe so you never miss one. And tell us in the comments, when did a stranger's kindness change everything for you?